Hello students, welcome to our afternoon read aloud. Today I'm going to share with you a very special story, one of my favorites about Abraham Lincoln, and it's called Mr. Lincoln's Whiskers. And whiskers are like a beard, right? And there on the cover, I see a little girl looking at a picture of Abraham Lincoln, kind of in the moonlight. And on the back, I see a picture of maybe the same little girl getting a little hug from Abraham Lincoln. Let's see what this story's about. Ooh, and look at those end papers. That looks like old-fashioned ink writing, right? In the old days, people used ink. And sometimes when it got wet, it would smudge a little. Here we go. Mr. Lincoln's Whiskers, written and illustrated by Karen Winnick. And there's the same little girl again looking at a picture of Lincoln. Oh, well, here he doesn't have a beard. Okay, so right away, I think it's the time of year maybe is fall. I can look at the trees. It's in the olden days, right? Around the time of Lincoln, I see a horse and a carriage. And there's that little girl running to greet someone. Maybe that's her dad. Let's see. Grace flew down the porch steps. "Papa, how was the fair?" she asked. "Did you meet Mr. Lincoln?" "No, Grace," Papa said. "Abraham Lincoln didn't come here to New York. He's remaining in Springfield, Illinois during the election." Ooh, so we know about the setting, right? This is happening in New York, and the election for Lincoln to hopefully maybe become president is going on right now. So this is in about 1861. Okay, wow, there's that little girl looking at the picture. And there's the family. Let's see. Grace's brothers and sisters greeted Papa. "Just in time for supper," Mama said. Papa had presents for everyone. "Levant, Helen, Alice, these are for you. George, Stephen, Frank, and here's one for baby, Una. And this one, Grace, is for you." "A poster of Mr. Lincoln? Oh, Papa, thank you." She held it up. Mr. Lincoln's face stared back at her. "He looks kind," Grace thought, "though his face seems sad." So two interesting things. That is a big family, right? In the old days, people had bigger families. And also, I've reminded you before that Lincoln was one of the first presidents whom we have actual photographs of, so we can really see and know what he looked like. Her brother, Levant, snickered. "He looks like a rail splitter, not a president." Ooh, so one of the brothers is kind of being disrespectful to Lincoln and saying he looks like someone who splits rails, like who does labor, right? Not like a president. "That's your opinion," Grace said. "Mr. Lincoln's got a good heart. I can see it in his face. He doesn't like slavery, does he, Papa?" "That's right," Papa said. George, Grace's oldest brother, spoke up. "But if Lincoln's elected, our country will be split in two." Her brother Stephen shook his head. "But how's it fair for one man to own another?" "It isn't," Grace said. "People are mean to slaves. I know about it from a book. If I could, I'd vote for Mr. Lincoln." "It's a good thing girls can't vote," said Levant. Grace pushed back her chair and ran out. So, two things I want to think about. Number one, in this family, different people have different ideas about who should be elected the president, right? And that sometimes happens in families. People have different opinions. They're also talking aloud about slavery, right? And we've been learning that's when one person owned another, and slaves were used on big farms to work very hard. And it was a very wrong thing that the country was arguing and divided about, because some people thought it was okay. Alone in her room, Grace studied the poster of Mr. Lincoln. "If I could vote, I'd vote for you," she whispered. Bright light from the moon cast deep shadows all about. A shadow fell across the poster. It made Mr. Lincoln look like he wore whiskers. Grace stared. With his chin and the hollows of his cheeks covered, his face seemed less sad. What if, Grace thought, So she's thinking about what he might look like with whiskers, with a beard, right? She hurried over to her desk. She took a sheet of paper and dipped her feather quill pen into a pot of ink. By the light of the moon, she wrote, Honorable A.B. Lincoln, dear sir, my father has just come from the fair and brought home your picture. I am a little girl, only 11 years old, but want you should be President of the United States very much. So I hope you won't think me very bold to write such a great man as you are. Have you any little girls about as large as I am? If so, give them my love and tell her to write to me. If you cannot answer this letter, I've got 4 brothers, and part of them will vote for you anyway. And if you will let your whiskers grow, I will try and get the rest of them to vote for you. You would look a great deal better, for your face is so thin. All the ladies like whiskers, and they would tease their husbands to vote for you, and then you would be president. My father is going to vote for you, and if I was a man, I would vote for you too. But I will try and get everyone to vote for you that I can. I must not write any more. Answer this letter right off. Goodbye, Grace Bedell. She wrote to Abraham Lincoln to suggest he grow his whiskers. Grace addressed the envelope, Springfield, Illinois. That's where Papa said he'd be. She put the letter in the envelope and tucked it under her pillow. Then she climbed into bed. In the morning, Grace hurried to mail the letter before going to school. She kept it hidden under her cape. If Levant knew she had written to Mr. Lincoln, he would laugh. Wow, that Levant is kind of her mean big brother, right? He's always teasing her and being critical. Just before the post office on Main Street, Grace stopped. Should she send the letter? Would she seem foolish? A small girl writing to such a great man? No, she decided. She had made a good suggestion. She went inside the post office. May I have a stamp, Mr. Man? She handed the postmaster a penny and her letter. To Mr. Abraham Lincoln? Mr. Man exclaimed. Why, Grace Bedell, did you write this yourself? She blushed and nodded. Well, he said, I wouldn't expect an answer. Mr. Lincoln is a busy man. Grace's shoulders drooped. She turned and walked slowly out of the post office. A few days later, she returned. Is there anything for me? No, said Mr. Man. I told you Mr. Lincoln is very busy. But the next day she trudged back, and the day after that. On the 7th day after she sent her letter, Grace headed toward the post office. Light snowflakes were falling. A crowd stood in front of the building. They talked in excited whispers. A man pointed. Here's Grace, he said. Mr. Man rushed outside, waving an envelope. Your letter came from Mr. Lincoln. Imagine, at our post office in Westfield. Grace took the letter. Her heart beat fast as she opened the envelope. What did Mr. Lincoln write? A boy asked. But Grace was already hurrying home, reading her letter. Oh, look, it's snowing, and she's reading the letter. She burst into the parlor. Mr. Lincoln answered my letter. Mama looked up. You wrote to Mr. Lincoln? Her brothers and sisters gathered round. What did you say? Where did you send it? Papa put down his pipe. Read us what he wrote, Gracie. She held up the letter. Spots from the melted snow dotted the paper. Grace read aloud. And here's the letter close up. Springfield, Illinois, October 19th, 1860. Miss Grace Bedell, my dear little miss. Your very agreeable letter of the 15th is received. I regret the necessity of saying I have no daughters. I have 3 sons, one 17, one 9, and one 7 years of age. They, with their mother, constitute my whole family. As to the whiskers, having never worn any, do you not think people would call it a piece of silly affection if I were to begin it now? Your very sincere well-wisher, Abe Lincoln. So he's asking, since he never had whiskers before, would people think it's a little silly just to start having a beard? Levant made a face. You wrote him about growing whiskers? I can't believe it, Mama said. Mr. Lincoln wrote to our Grace. You should be very proud, Papa said. On election day, Grace watched Papa and her brothers go off to cast their votes. Oh, I hope Mr. Lincoln wins, she thought. And remember, this is long ago when women did not vote yet. Late the following day, people were shouting in the streets. The Telegraph says Mr. Lincoln is winning. He's going to be our next president. Grace and Papa hugged each other. A month later, Papa sat in the parlor reading his newspaper. He looked up. Listen to this, he said. Abraham Lincoln is traveling from Springfield to Washington, D.C. to be sworn into office. His train will stop for wood and water right here in Westfield. Grace jumped out of her chair. Can we go to the station? She asked. I want to see Mr. Lincoln. After writing him such a foolish letter? Asked Levant. Oh my gosh, that Levant never stops saying mean things, does he? He's terrible. The wind whistled across the tracks. Grace pushed her hands into her muff. She blew out a stream of air. There was a faint chug-a-chug. Grace squeezed forward. Mama touched her shoulder and pulled her back. Stay close. But I want to see Mr. Lincoln, Grace said. So there you can see them kind of at the back of the crowd. And there's Grace, smaller than all the grown-ups. The chug-a-chug got louder and louder. A bell rang. Gray clouds rose from the engine smokestack. People shouted and waved flags. The long, dark train drew into the station. Grace stood on her toes, but she couldn't see above the stovepipe hats and feathered bonnets. Where was Mr. Lincoln? Was he speaking? She couldn't hear with all the clapping and the cheering. Suddenly, people began to turn around. Where is she? Where is she? Grace heard them murmur. Grace, Grace! Mr. Man pushed through the crowd. Mr. Lincoln wants to see you. Everyone hurried to move out of her way. Grace could hear their whispering as she went past. Mr. Man led her to the front of the platform. Look, she's going up to the front. Abraham Lincoln stood before her. Hello, Grace, he said. How do you like the improvement you advised me to make? Mr. Lincoln bent down and gave her a kiss. His whiskers tickled her cheek. The end. And here are real photographs of the real letters written by Grace and Abraham Lincoln, because this is a totally true story. Yes, we heard a little bit about it before, and I always just love reading this to students because it's just amazing to think this little girl who was a real fan of Lincoln, and her dad was for Lincoln, but not all her family was, but she actually wrote to him, and he wrote her back, and he grew some whiskers. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed our afternoon read aloud. Don't forget to keep washing your hands, cover your coughs and sneezes, do some reading, do some writing, help your family around the house, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.